History is written by the victors. Right, we all know about Waterloo, Gettysburg, and Stalingrad. But what about the battles that were so brutal, so chaotic, that they were almost erased from the pages of history? What about the fights that left no glorious heroes, only scars and forgotten graves? Today, we're digging deep into one such conflict, the Battle of Orescani, fought in 1777. This isn't a story of grand strategy or celebrated generals. This is a story of mud, blood, and desperation, a clash so savage it was buried by time. So, grab your gear, because we're about to uncover a battle that history tried to forget. Before we march onto the battlefield of Orescani, we need to understand the world of 1777. The American Revolution was raging across the Atlantic, sending shockwaves through the old empires of Europe. But closer to home, in the fractured lands of Eastern Europe, tensions were at a boiling point. The great powers, the Russian Empire, the Habsburg monarchy, and the declining Ottoman Empire were locked in a tense chess match for territory and influence. This region was a powder keg of shifting alliances, ethnic rivalries, and petty kingdoms, all vying for survival. It wasn't a time of clear-cut wars between two nations. It was a chaotic free-for-all where a minor border dispute could explode into a full-blown massacre overnight. The Battle of Orescani wasn't part of a famous war. It was a symptom of this widespread instability, a local conflict fueled by generations of bad blood and imperial ambition. In this environment, a single spark could ignite a firestorm. And in the summer of 1777, that spark was lit near the small, insignificant village of Orescani. So why haven't you heard of it? Why isn't Orescani studied alongside other 18th century battles? The answer is simple and brutal. It served no one's narrative. There was no decisive victory to celebrate, no heroic charge to immortalize in a painting. For the larger empires involved, it was an embarrassing and costly mess, a sideshow they preferred to sweep under the rug. The battle resulted in such devastating losses on both sides that neither could claim a clear win. It was a strategic stalemate that achieved nothing but death and destruction. Historians of the time, often commissioned by kings and emperors, focused on glorious campaigns that expanded their patrons' power. A bloody, inconclusive meat grinder like Orescani didn't fit the heroic story they were paid to tell. It was inconvenient history. Furthermore, the records themselves are sparse. The chaos of the battle meant official reports were contradictory or lost. For the local population, it was a trauma to be buried and forgotten, not commemorated. It was simply easier for everyone to pretend it never happened. Let's get into the nuts and bolts of the fighting. Imagine the scene. It's not a neat, orderly battlefield. It's a confusing mess of wooded hills, marshy ground, and scattered farmsteads around Orescani. The armies of the 18th century were a strange mix of old and new. The primary weapon was the smoothbore flintlock musket. These were notoriously inaccurate. An average soldier might be lucky to hit a man-sized target at 80 yards. Because of this, tactics revolved around massed formations. Soldiers stood shoulder to shoulder in long lines, 3 ranks deep, to maximize their collective firepower. The command would ring out, "Make ready. Present. Fire." A huge cloud of white smoke would erupt, and a volley of lead balls would fly towards the enemy. Then came the terrifying part. Fixing bayonets. After a few volleys, the battle would inevitably dissolve into a brutal hand-to-hand struggle with bayonets, swords, and musket butts. Cavalry units, the shock troops of the era, would wait for a moment of weakness to charge, their sabers flashing as they crashed into wavering infantry lines. And overseeing it all was the artillery. Cannons firing solid iron cannonballs could tear bloody lanes through packed ranks of men, while canister shot essentially a giant shotgun shell turned cannons into close-range killing machines. At Orescani, the difficult terrain broke up these formations, turning the battle into a series of smaller, even more savage skirmishes in the woods and swamps. It was less of a structured battle and more of a sprawling, chaotic brawl. Now, let's talk about the human cost. This is the part of the story that gets left out of the glorious paintings. For the common soldier, life was hell. He was likely a peasant, conscripted into service with little training and even less pay. His uniform was probably ill-fitting, his shoes worn out. He marched 4 miles on an empty stomach, slept in the open, and was constantly threatened by disease, which killed more soldiers than combat did. On the morning of the battle, he would be woken before dawn, perhaps given a piece of hard bread and some watered-down spirits. He would stand in rank for hours, his heart pounding in his chest, listening to the distant boom of cannons. The noise would have been deafening, the roar of musketry, the thunder of artillery, the screams of the wounded. The air would be thick with acrid smoke, so dense you could barely see the enemy in front of you. He would see his friends, the men he shared stories with the night before, fall beside him with horrific injuries. Medical care was primitive. A wound to the arm or leg often meant amputation without anesthetic, using a saw on a blood-soaked wooden table. A gut wound was a slow, agonizing death sentence. At Orescani, the chaotic nature of the fighting meant many wounded were left on the field, trampled in the mud or left to die slowly over days. There was no glory here. There was only fear, pain, and a desperate struggle to survive another minute. The official casualty counts, though unreliable, suggest that over a third of the men who fought that day were killed or wounded, a staggering price for a battle that meant nothing. Let's try to reconstruct the events of that fateful day. It began with a skirmish over a disputed bridge near Orescani. A small detachment of troops from the voivodeship of Moldavia clashed with a border patrol from a neighboring Habsburg territory. What should have been a minor incident quickly spiraled out of control. Both sides called for reinforcements. Fueled by years of simmering resentment, commanders on both sides saw a chance to settle old scores. Instead of de-escalating, they committed more and more troops. The initial clash on the bridge expanded into the surrounding forests and fields. The Habsburg forces, better disciplined, tried to form traditional battle lines, but the dense woods and marshy ground broke their cohesion. The Moldavian forces, more familiar with the terrain, used it to their advantage, launching ambushes and fighting in a more irregular, guerrilla style. The battle devolved into a series of desperate struggles for control of key features. Small hill, a patch of woods, a farmhouse. There was no grand plan. It was pure reaction and instinct. A cavalry charge would get bogged down in the mud. An infantry line would advance into the woods, only to be cut to pieces by hidden defenders. For hours, the fight swayed back and forth with incredible ferocity. By late afternoon, both sides were exhausted, disorganized, and had taken horrendous casualties. As dusk fell, a torrential rainstorm began, turning the battlefield into a quagmire of mud and blood. The fighting slowly fizzled out, not because a victor had been decided, but because the men could no longer fight. The aftermath of Orescani was as bleak as the battle itself. As the rain fell on the fields littered with the dead and dying, the surviving soldiers limped away. There was no victory parade. There was no triumphal march home. Both armies retreated, leaving the village of Orescani and its surroundings utterly devastated. Crops were trampled, homes were burned, and the local population was left to deal with the carnage. For the commanders, it was a disaster. They had wasted thousands of men and resources for absolutely no strategic gain. In their reports, back to their respective capitals, they downplayed the scale of the fighting and the extent of their losses, framing it as a minor border incident. And so, the process of forgetting began. The soldiers who survived carried the mental and physical scars for the rest of their lives, but their stories were not the kind that nations build monuments to. The Battle of Orescani became a ghost, a whisper in local folklore, a footnote in a dusty archive. It stands as a powerful reminder that for every famous victory recorded in our history books, there are countless other pointless struggles where thousands of lives were extinguished for nothing, their sacrifice forgotten by the very history they were a part of. So, what can we learn from a forgotten battle like Orescani? It teaches us that history is not just a collection of dates and famous names. It's a human story, often a messy and tragic one. It forces us to look beyond the grand narratives and see the reality of conflictive fear, the suffering, and the futility that often lies beneath the surface of glory. It reminds us that every soldier in those massive, faceless armies was an individual with a life, a family, and a future that was cut short. The story of Orescani is the story of the common soldier, the one whose name is never recorded but whose blood fertilizes the fields of history. By uncovering these forgotten battles, we get a more complete, more honest picture of our past. We honor the memory of those who were lost and learn a crucial lesson. The true cost of war is not measured in territory gained or enemies defeated, but in the human lives that are shattered and forgotten. Thank you for joining us on this journey into a forgotten corner of history. It's these hidden stories that often tell us the most about who we are. If you found this exploration of the Battle of Orescani fascinating, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into the battles that time forgot. Don't forget to ring the notification bell so you never miss an episode. What other forgotten conflicts do you think we should cover? Let us know in the comments below. We love hearing your suggestions. Until next time, keep questioning history. Thanks for watching.